Coming up next on this special edition of Arizona Horizon, an interview with former President Jimmy Carter. We'll hear about President Carter's life, his political career, and his new book, President Jimmy Carter, next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. President Jimmy Carter went from life in rural Georgia to military service, then made a living as a farmer, all before he got into politics, and a career path that took him all the way to the White House as America's 39th chief executive. President Carter is in Phoenix promoting his new book, appropriately titled A Full Life, Reflections at 90. Joining us now is President Jimmy Carter. Good to have you here. Welcome to Arizona Horizon.
Well, it's good to be with you and people all around Arizona.
It's great to have you. Speaking of Arizona, thoughts, memories, experiences in Arizona?
Well, just a beautiful state, and I campaigned here and in 49 other states, as a matter of fact. And I had pretty good support here during the primary. And the general election, I would say that President Ford carried most of the states west of Mississippi, and I carried almost all of them east of Mississippi, and I came out a little bit ahead.
Yeah, you did. As far as the book is concerned now, you've written a lot of books. You've written a number of them, and much of what's in this book has been touched on in some way, shape, or form in the previous efforts. How does this book differ from the others?
Well, this is my 29th book, and I covered things in this book that I haven't really done before. Why I decided to run for president, for instance, my life in the Navy, the relationship that I had with former presidents and ones that served after me. The things that I was able to accomplish and resolve fully when I was president, and things that I had to postpone for others to address. Those kind of things, my relationships with my wife early on, some of the major lessons I've learned in life, and sometimes the hard way, which may be helpful to other people that read the book. So a lot of things in there that I've never written before.
Indeed, and Reflections at 90, memories. What memories do you find at this stage, do you find that you enjoy most?
The most enjoyable part of my life has been since I left the White House. Of course, it was great to be president of the greatest country in the world, and to have that authority and that power and influence. And knowledge of internal affairs and that sort of thing. But I've had a much better life, I would say, during the 35 or so years since we left the White House. We have programs in 70 different countries in the world, and we deal with the most intricate matters that governments don't want to fool with. We go to Myanmar, we go to meet with all the Palestinian groups, we go to North Korea, we go to Cuba, we go to Sudan, and so forth. We go to Nepal and meet with the Maoists. So we meet with people that cause problems in the world that we can help resolve. And we also started a program of bringing people democracy and freedom. We just finished our 100th troubled election in May. And this year we'll treat about 71 million people so they won't go blind or have some other horrible disease that is no longer known in the even halfway developed world, but afflicts hundreds of millions of people in the very poor countries, particularly in Africa and Latin America.
Getting so much done now after leaving the White House, why do you think it's working better, and the best memories sound like they're the most recent ones for you? Why do you think that is? Because
I was president first. You know, I wouldn't be able to do the things that I know how to do now if I hadn't been president of a great country first. And I wouldn't have the direct access to any leader on earth, you know, any king or president or prime minister that I want to meet. I just call him, and he's very eager to meet me, and then I tell him what we want to do in his country or her country, and they generally agree and cooperate with us. And if I go to a pharmaceutical company and ask them for hundreds of millions of doses of medicine, primarily because I have been president of a country and they respect me, they give this medicine to us, and we go into the jungle areas, to the poor little cities and towns in the jungle, and also in the desert areas, and give the medicine to people. So, and I couldn't orchestrate honest and fair election processes in troubled countries and actually go in with some associates and conduct an honest and fair election if it hadn't been from my experience in the White House.
Indeed.
And my wife and also, we every year for 1 week we go and build habitat houses for poor people in need. We've done that now for 32 years, and later on this year we'll be in Nepal, where Mount Everest is. We'll build 100 houses there in 1 week with other volunteers who join us. Those are the kind of things we're able to do, primarily because I was president.
My goodness. I asked the memories that you enjoy the most. What memories for you are the hardest?
Well, the White House years were the most troubling, and of course the last year I was in office when the hostages were being held in Iran was the most troubling of all. I prayed more about it, I was more concerned about it. But we eventually brought every hostage home safe and free, and I protected the interest of my country. But that was a very trying time. And then we had some very intense negotiations to formalize relations with People's Republic of China, for instance, to start ending apartheid in Africa, in countries, and to go to Panama and resolve the issue of the Panama Canal treaties, and then to go to the Holy Land and bring peace between Israel and Egypt. Those were some of the things that were challenging to me.
Did you enjoy, you said it was great to be president.
It was.
Did you enjoy being
I
president?
did, yes. You know, there were some trying times, and I would say the overwhelming, joyous and productive and exciting and challenging and unpredictable and adventurous times have been since I left the White House because of the diversity of things we do and the direct personal contact that we make. We actually go into individual villages, assess their problems in health care, and then we actually administer medicines if it's needed, or teach them how to resolve an ancient problem that people may have suffered for 20,000 years. And that's very gratifying to us.
It's interesting. You talk about all the things you're doing and the Carter Center is doing, and moderating elections, monitoring elections, and getting health care to people that need it. Such an active public service kind of a life. And yet, there you are in rural Georgia as a kid, marrying the girl. I mean, you literally married the girl next door, didn't you?
I did. And as a matter of fact, my mother was a nurse, and the first day that Rosen was alive, I went over and looked through the cradle at my future wife, my mother tells me. So we've known each other. We still live in the same little town, about 650 people, Plains, Georgia.
And when you were young, I know that you write that most of your friends were African American.
Yeah, almost all of them.
It didn't really. When did racial inequities, just the racial divide, the racial question, when did that hit you? At what age?
Well, when I was younger, I didn't have any friends except black boys and girls, and my mother was a registered nurse. She was gone a lot, and so African American women kind of took care of me and raised me and taught me about the proper attitude toward life, toward God, toward my fellow human beings, and taught me the names of trees and birds and things. So I was raised in a black culture. And then I would say when I was about 14 years old, I wrote a poem about this lady called The Pasture Gate. Two African American friends and I were coming out of the field to the barn, and we went through a gate. And when we got to the gate, they opened it and then stepped back to let me go first. And I thought there was a tripwire there or something that I would fall down. And I finally realized later that that was a time in their life and mine when their parents probably told them, it's time for you to start treating Jimmy as a white person and not as a complete equal with you anymore. And as I said at the end of the poem, that was drawing a line between friends and friends, race and race. But it was later that I realized that that's probably what happened. And then I was in the submarine force. I was a submarine officer when Harry Truman ordained as commander-in-chief, as president, that all the racial discrimination should be over in all the armed services and also the civil service of our government. And that was kind of a turning point in my life.
Yeah, the Pasture Gate incident in the book is fascinating because you can tell just the way you write it, that it really did impact you.
Well, it did.
It was something that you weren't aware of, and now all of a sudden here's the world.
And I realized later that when we finally got the Civil Rights Act passed and when Martin Luther King Jr. and Andy Young and Rosa Parks were successful, that we had removed a millstone from around the neck of both black and white people. And I think really the last few months with the tragedy in South Carolina and with the abuse by police of black people, that we are beginning to see that we still have a long way to go. That we kind of breathed a sigh of relief and said it's all over now, no more discrimination, all equality from now on, no more white supremacy. But that's not true yet.
Still have a ways to go.
We still have a ways.
Your father, you write, showed fairness and respect for all, but he was a man of his time and place, wasn't he?
He was, and everybody else was too. And as was the Supreme Court, as was the U.S. Congress, as was all the churches, as were all the American Bar Association members. There was no question in those days of the 30s and 40s that racial discrimination was wrong and should be corrected.
You write quite a bit about your naval experience. How did the Navy shape your life?
Yeah, I would say the preeminent factor at the Naval Academy was do not lie. If a midshipman there told the slightest falsehood, he was out. That was the end of his naval career. If you stepped on the grass and somebody saw you and then you later said, I didn't step on the grass, you were gone. And so I think to tell the truth was a preeminent mandate of all the midshipmen. And I kind of carried that over, and later it became kind of a motif for me when I was running for president. I would say, if I would tell a lie, don't vote for me, and so forth. And it was at a time in history that we had too many lies told by our government and too many devastating blows. The Watergate crisis and the Vietnam War misrepresentations and the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Kennedy brothers and the revelation by Frank Church committee that the president and the CIA had committed crimes against you might say enemy leaders overseas. Those kind of things were all revealed, and I came along at a right time.
You came along at a right time, but you came along at a time when addressing these issues and doing it as a bit of an outsider. You were considered an outsider.
I was.
Yeah. Didn't make you many friends, did it?
No, but I didn't need many friends. All of them, I had about 12 opponents, all more famous than I was. And either big states or in the U.S. Senate or something like that. And by the time I got recognized as a legitimate candidate, all of the, you might say, the semi-professional politicians around different states had already aligned themselves with a more favored candidate. So I had to take what was left over, young people and newcomers to politics. And I didn't have any money. We didn't have money at all. And we didn't ever stay in a hotel room. We just got people to let us stay in their house if we could beg them to, or either we slept in an automobile. And that was all my staff. So when I ran finally against Gerald Ford, who was incumbent president, he and I raised zero money. We didn't raise a single dollar of contribution from anybody that might want something back after we were elected. And the same thing happened, by the way, 4 years later when I ran against Ronald Reagan. We didn't raise any money. We just took a $1 per person check off that some taxpayers volunteered to give.
When you see what happens in this day and age regarding money and politics, I think you write that you consider it legal bribery.
It is legal bribery. Well, there's no doubt. Now, you can't possibly hope to be the Democratic or Republican nominee for president if you can't raise $200 or $300 million. And I won't condemn those people that give, but some of the people that give want something back after the election is over, either from an incumbent president or congressman or U.S. senator or governor or something like that. So it's made it completely legal to give unlimited amounts of money and get something in return. So that's one of the main reasons we've seen such a dramatic change in the relationship between very rich people who are getting richer and richer and the average working people in this country that are not.
The campaign against President Ford was different as well in the sense you were both respectful of each other, and that respect lasted really after you both left the White House.
Yeah, well, the historians said publicly and in writing that the two presidents, former presidents in the United States that had the closest personal friendship was Gerald Ford and I. And I was very proud of that. And his wife was a friend of my wife, and children were friends of each other. So we had a very intimate and gratifying relationship.
As far as being in the White House, you write that you had problems with the media, and I think almost every president says they have problems with the media. But you thought maybe they couldn't accept a Southerner, that was a factor at play. Talk to us about that.
Well, when I was elected, I was the first person from the Deep South that was chosen to be president in about 150 years. It was just one thing done. And I think a lot of the media, from the North in particular, and they control the media pretty much, felt that there was somehow behind, in my background, an inclination toward racism still, that I was a Southerner and still was committed to racial distinctions. And that was right after the Watergate revelations, and you know, some investigatory reporters had gotten famous because they revealed what went on with Richard Nixon. I think they felt, a lot of them, that they were going to find something wrong with me that would be gratifying for their own career. So there was a scholarly analysis done, and I was in office 48 months, and 46 months I had negative news coverage. Just the first 2 months was the only time I got positive, but we learned to live with it.
Yeah, and again, we hear from presidents afterwards, or supporters of presidents, that everyone seems to have a problem with the media, don't
That's
they?
true.
As far as successes now in the Camp David Accords were amazing. To think in this day and age that you had Egypt and Israel shaking hands there, and you right there in the middle. But those talks at Camp David, very personal. The relationship's very personal, and yes. I thought that signing a photograph with Menachem Begin's grandkid, I thought that was a fascinating story.
Well, we had failed at the end of 12 days. We were there 13, and we were getting ready to go back to Washington and announce that we had not been successful and go home. And Begin was very angry with me because I had made some demands on Israel that he didn't think he could accept. And so he asked me for a signed photograph of me and him and Sadat together, just as a souvenir. And my secretary called Israel and got the name of his 8 grandchildren. So instead of putting best wishes Jimmy Carter, I put with love and best wishes too, and I put the name of each grandchild and then signed it. And I took it over to his cabin to give him the photographs to him, and he was very cool toward me. He said, "Thank you, Mr. President." He reached out and took the photographs, and he turned around and walked away, kind of. I stood there, and he looked at the photographs, and he began to read the names of his grandchildren one by one. And when he got to about the 3rd name, he had tears coming down his cheeks, and his voice was kind of choked up. I was too. And he finally said, "Mr. President, why don't we make one more effort?" And so we made another effort, and we were successful. But I think it was because of those photographs and his realization that he was possibly bringing peace to his own grandkids that he said, I'll be a little more flexible.
Your most difficult political decision, you write, was the Panama Canal, but your most important diplomatic decision was China.
I think that's right, yes. Well, getting 2/3 of the Senate to vote for the Panama Canal treaties was much more difficult for me than getting elected president in the first place. And it was one of the most courageous votes that the Senate ever did. There were 20 people in the Senate that voted for those treaties in 1978 that ran for re-election. Of the 20, only 7 came back the next January. And the attrition rate was just as big in 1980. But anyway, that was very difficult. But I think as far as shaking up political alliances in the world on a sustained basis, my decision to normalize diplomatic relations with China was probably more significant. Yes.
Indeed. I also noticed that you did have a health care plan, and you had ideas there, but Teddy Kennedy, of all people, seemed to get in the way. What happened there?
Well, Ted Kennedy wanted to be president, and for the last 2 years I was in office, he was my full-time candidate against me, and he didn't want me to, to experience any major successes, which I can certainly comprehend, having been in politics myself. But we worked on this comprehensive health plan for every human being. It was basically to extend Medicare to everybody, and we had money to pay for it, phased in. And we had all 6 committees in the House and Senate lined up to help us, including Ted Kennedy's committee. And then the last week, when we were getting ready to reveal it, he changed his mind, and he decided to oppose it. And he was powerful enough in the Senate to block its passage. And there's no doubt that we would have had comprehensive health care for all Americans 30 years earlier if Kennedy had maintained his commitment to the program that he had helped me develop.
Last year in office, we got to get there, and you write that it was the most stressful and unpleasant of your life.
It was.
As far as the hostages, obviously, the failed rescue mission, was that the right decision? And regardless of 2020 hindsight, because your Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, did not think it was a good decision.
He was the only one that didn't.
And he wound up resigning. But do you think it was still the right decision?
It was. It was. We had to have 6 helicopters to bring out all the hostages and the rescue team. We couldn't have left them behind because they would very likely have been killed by the Iranians. But so, and the military told me we need to have at least 6 helicopters to come out. So I decided we'd have 7 and then 8. And we had 2 helicopters go down. One turned back unexpectedly to the aircraft carrier, I don't know why yet. The other one went down in a sandstorm, which left us with 6. And then we were in Desert One getting ready to go in and rescue the hostages. We knew where everyone was and so forth. That particular helicopter had a fuel leak, and it swerved sideways and hit one of the airplanes there. And we had to abort the mission. So I think if we'd had one more helicopter, we would have got the hostages out. I would have had a second term, and history might have been a little bit better, but I don't think that my life would have been much more pleasant.
You refrained from using the military against Iran.
Yes.
Why?
Well, I tried to promote 2 basic ideals of mine as a Christian. One was to keep the peace. We worship the Prince of Peace. And to promote human rights in all their aspects. And so I did the best I could, not only to keep peace for my own country, but to bring peace to others, including Egypt and Israel and so forth, I've already mentioned. And so I would say most of my advisors, even including my wife, proposed that I should attack Iran militarily, which we could have destroyed Iran. And I just decided to try to use peaceful means. And so I was fortunate in not only protecting my country's interests, but we never dropped a bomb, we never launched a missile, we never fired a bullet while I was in office. And a lot of it was good fortune, a lot of it was a commitment on my part.
And yet those hostages were not released until after the election. There's been a lot written about this and a lot speculated about. I want to ask you, do you think there was some sort of deal? Do you think that that was by design?
You know, that's a question I never have been willing to answer, because I've deliberately avoided getting involved in any sort of research to prove it. There have been books written about it that say that there was a deal between the White House and the Ayatollah Khomeini. I don't know. The only thing I know is that I stayed up 3 days and nights. I never went to bed even, the last 3 days I was in office at night. And I negotiated between Iran and 12 other countries to get the hostages free. And at 9 o'clock that morning of Inauguration Day, when I was going out of office, all the hostages were in an airplane at the end of the runway ready to take off. And I was waiting for them to take off, and the Ayatollah didn't let them do so until 5 minutes after I was no longer in office. Why? I don't know.
Do you want to know?
Not really.
That incident, I know that Kennedy and Reagan at the time, they called you an ineffective leader. They called you weak on that. Your emphasis on human rights, that was seen at the time as weakness. Did that how did you respond to that? Because this was used against you, and it worked. You did not win that re-election.
Well, I didn't use it wisely. I think I said in the book here that one of the things I didn't do was to keep the Democratic Party vital and alive and loyal to me. And I let Kennedy move in, and he took over a good portion of the Democratic Party, the more ultra-liberal members of the Democratic Party. I had to depend on Republicans to help me get my legislation passed, which I got. I mean, I got as much support from Republicans as I did Democrats while I was in the White House, and had a very good batting average. But I think that the human rights issue was one of the strongest and politically demanding things that I did, because we brought freedom and peace to a lot of people on earth that never had known it before. If you have time, I'll give you one quick example.
Please.
In Latin America, when I became president, we were in bed with every dictator in Latin America, in South America and in Central America and in the Caribbean. And whenever one of our dictator friends was challenged by Native Americans or Native people or indigenous people or poor people, we would send troops down, either Marines or Army troops, to defend our military friend, who not only probably had graduated from West Point and his kids went to American colleges, but who also would provide us with very beneficial contracts for pineapple and for bananas and for bauxite and for iron ore and for those kinds of things. So we had a lot of money flowing in to us because we supported them. I put an end to that. And within 7 years, every country in South America had become a democracy. When before that, almost every one of them was a dictatorship.
Yeah.
So I think that showed that human rights paid off.
Well, we're about to run out of time. I could talk to you forever. We're about to run out of time. You have mentioned that these are the best, and I think at the end of your book, you write that the life you have now is the best of all. And you have been talked about, and people will refer to you as the best former president we've ever had. Is that a little bittersweet to hear?
Well, to my wife it is. It really doesn't bother me. You know, I did the best I could. As Fritz Mondale said, we told the truth, we kept the law, and we kept the peace. And I say we protected human rights. So, you know, we did the best we could.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. The book is very interesting. I got to tell you, I was around back then as well, and it brings back a lot of memories. And congratulations on a life well lived. Do you ever just press the snooze button and say, I feel like sleeping in? You're a busy man.
Well, we do. We stay busy, but we also enjoy life very much. We have 38 in our family now. We have 22 children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I met with some in Los Angeles when I was there recently. And so we have a good, quiet life, my wife and I do in Plains, but we still have the 80 countries around the world that we visit whenever we can.
My goodness. President Carter, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you. Good questions.
Thank you. And that is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Eight, members of your Arizona PBS station. Thank you.